support our Prime Minister. I support our government. It's hard to leave, but it's hard to pick the right time to leave public life, and I'm choosing to leave on top.
I want to recognize the extraordinary service that Scott Brison has offered to Canadians for 22 years. Obviously, this will require some changes to our cabinet, and that's something that we're going to be announcing on Monday.
Okay, an upcoming cabinet shuffle, 3 by-elections called. The House isn't even back yet, but the government already making moves. So with Scott Brison on his way out, what or who should the government be dealing with in this shuffle? At Issue is here to tackle some of these changes as we officially start off the new year. Andrew Coyne is in Toronto tonight. Shachi Kurl is in Vancouver. Andre Demise also in Toronto tonight. Chantal is away. She'll be back next week, fear not. Not that I'm not thrilled to see all of you, but I know I'll get some tweets, so there we go. Andrew, David Cochrane off the top of the show reported that this shuffle wouldn't have happened if Scott Brison wasn't stepping back, that this is the only impetus for it. But it does provide the PM, I guess, with an opportunity. And if there are areas or people that he needs to address, what areas does he need to start thinking about shoring up before an election?
I think there are 2 major files that could be potentially hazardous government's electoral chances, where they've been weak on communications, and that's mostly what cabinet ministers are for nowadays, not so much policy setting. One is on the whole carbon pricing, and I suppose carbon pricing / pipelines file, but they have been losing ground all year on the carbon pricing issue. They've been falling in the polls, supporters have been falling for it. Whether you can necessarily blame all that on Catherine McKenna or not, she is the minister, she wears that. I think they may be looking or would be advised to look for a better communicator on that file. The other one is immigration. That's always a potentially toxic and inflammatory issue. They're not necessarily on top of that, and certainly if we got another increase in people arriving at the border, they'd have a communications challenge on there, and they may need to look at shoring up support on that file as well.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's kind of more interesting, Chachi, to talk about the issues rather than the people, because the people may stay or go because of, all sorts of reasons, but there are issues for the government that are clear weaknesses, and they may decide for whatever reason that they need additional support. Do you have any sense of what those might be?
Well, a broader issue that isn't necessarily a line department or an issue that we've been talking about over the last months is one of, here you had in Scott Brison, not necessarily a household name, but a well-known name within political circles, longtime MP. He was somebody who represented the moderate side of the Liberal Party. At a time when it is pulling further and further to the left, you had somebody who could go and be a credible voice with business. And so in terms of Trudeau's bench strength, former Progressive Conservative MP, now outgoing minister, who does he have on a one-for-one basis that he can go in, send to Bay Street, have those Treasury Board chops and say, you know what, here's somebody who can equally represent our side of things in those rooms where we are arguably lacking?
Yeah, that's a hard, if he has to fill that job, I'm not sure who that would be either. That's a hard thing to fill. Andre, are there opportunities now for the PM to correct areas that, whether it be policy areas or people that maybe aren't performing as well as he would like?
Well, I agree with Andrew in the sense that, getting a handle on the immigration docket, especially given that, Canada essentially relies on its immigrant population to keep the country going. I think the Prime Minister and this government has done a very weak job of presenting a case to Canadians as to why immigration is essential. I think if you pair that along with where we're heading in terms of renewable energy, the fact that we have protests happening against pipelines and the Trans Mountain debacle, if we can't get a handle on these 2 issues, it's going to be a pretty rocky election.
Okay, I want to talk about the by-elections because I think they also, as they are wont to do, will give us some indications about the federal election. Maybe not all the answers, but some clues. There's 3 of them. The Liberals, I think, are hoping to reclaim Outremont, which would be bad news for the NDP. That's, of course, Tom Mulcair's outgoing riding. But the one I guess everyone will be watching is Jagmeet Singh. He is running in Burnaby South, and here's what he had to say about the much anticipated by-election because he was waiting desperately for it to be called. Here's what he had to say.
This government has made hundreds and thousands of Canadians. There's 3 ridings, so that's 300,000 Canadians wait for so long to get representation. He's played games, and we've tabled a bill. New Democrats have tabled a bill in the House that would require by-elections to be called within 45 days to take away these type of games in the future.
Andrew, I know you have views on why this happened the way it did, and certainly the Prime Minister could have called it sooner, decided to call it now. Do you think that it was, I don't know, a more cynical move than just deciding on a random date?
Oh yeah, they could have filled that by-election anytime in the last 4 months. So yeah, they are playing games, and I think the context here is that Jagmeet Singh has proved to be not a particularly impressive performer as NDP leader. He lags significantly behind his party in the polls, and his party's not doing very well in the polls. So there are more than a few New Democrats, frankly, who would like to be rid of him. And a soft and gentle way, if there is such a thing in politics, would be for if he were to lose that by-election, certainly if he were to lose that by-election back in November or December. Then it would be very clear there'd be lots of time to replace him. When you start getting into late February, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens if he were to lose that by-election. The conventional wisdom is that the party would all say, you've got to go, it's time to go. I think when you start getting that late, you start getting into games about, would some of the party prefer to see, if they're going to go down in the election, if they're going to have a bad election, would some in the party with leadership aspirations prefer that they were to go down with Jagmeet Singh at the helm? There'd be some who would say that. There'd be some who might prefer to see him go now because they'd like to be the leader before the election and be able to say, well, I did the best with what I could and I rescued the wreckage. So it will be interesting to see which party stalwarts take which position were that to follow from the by-election.
I mean, he could win. We should point that out. That is possible.
Also possible.
Shachi, what do you think was at stake here for the Prime Minister in terms of timing, but also for Singh now as we move forward?
Well, long are the knives of conspiracy, Andrew, but let's just counter the
politics.
narrative. They are indeed. But, you know, here's a couple of caveats or counters to some of the narrative around could Jagmeet Singh lose? Sure, he could lose. Lots of things could happen. But one of the things we keep hearing about is, well, it was very close in 2015. Just because an election was close 3+ years ago doesn't mean voters are going to vote the same way. And elections, by-elections particularly, are very ho-hum for people in constituencies. Voter turnout tends to be lower. People are less alive to being really motivated to vote. There isn't all the hype of it, unless, of course, you're watching august panels such as this, in which case you're very in touch with things. So it really comes down to ground game. And a couple of things about the ground game in Burnaby South. This is a riding, and as we both know, we all know, the party doesn't have a split between the provincial and the federal wing in BC. So that means lists are being shared, volunteers are being pulled, and what star power that the NDP can draw on the provincial side, you've got prominent longtime MLAs like Raj Chauhan standing up with Jagmeet Singh. You've got former MPs like Peter Julian showing up. And so they are going to, the party and organizers are going to be counting very much on the goodwill generated by those people rather than what Singh can generate himself in order to push him over the top. And indeed, if they don't understand that this is not do or die, this is do or die for Singh, then you know, time to wake up on that front.
Although oddly, Andre, Singh doesn't seem, well, he's not saying that publicly. Maybe he thinks it privately, but he has said that if he loses, he's not going to quit. Obviously, I don't know what else he would say. But Mulcair did tell our colleagues at CTV that if he loses, he's gone, which was interesting coming from Paul Mulcair.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think he's thanking his lucky stars that he didn't try to make a switch and go for a Raj Grewal's seat in Brampton East. I do personally think that if he cannot win this by-election, then he can't really sit as leader of the party. And I would say over the last several months, he's been almost absent. I said previously that it's almost like the NDP has to put him on the back of a milk carton to find out where he is. On some of the more pressing issues, you've seen people like Charlie Angus come out front and center on issues that are important to progressive Canadians. So I think what he's going to have to do is not only recapture the seat, but also recapture the leadership of the party and be the face of the party's more pressing issues.
Can I pull back on both of these issues, which I think are sort of telling around electoral fortunes, right? In terms of where people think their support is going. I mean, the fact that the Liberals are running someone against Jagmeet Singh maybe speaks to the fact that they think they can pick up seats in British Columbia. They are aware that they've got 4 in Nova Scotia, but there are probably some to lose in Atlantic Canada. They hope to pick up way more in Quebec, which is sort of what the Outremont by-election is about. Can we read that much into sort of these early machinations and moves, Andrew, that there is already an electoral map, I think, that's going to look quite different than it did the last time around?
Yes, I mean, you've sort of said a great deal of it, that they're definitely going to
Sorry.
they're definitely going to lose seats in Atlantic Canada.
Yeah.
They most likely will pick up seats in Quebec. I think Ontario, as usual, will be the main battleground, Ontario and BC. Because, and to the extent, we've talked about this, to the extent that the carbon tax and that issue is going to be salient, I think it's going to be fought out in those 2 provinces. In BC, more to do with the pipelines, but Ontario, if the carbon tax is going to be that big an issue, that's where it will tell seats. And yeah, so you may well see, and for that reason, a cabinet shuffle to try to give them a better performer, better spokesperson, particularly in Ontario, on that file.
So where does that leave the Conservatives then, Shachi? If we're looking at the map in that way, with the Liberals and the NDP, what should we make of how the Conservatives have to sort of focus down on those areas for the reasons that Andrew said?
Well, look, this is where we come back to issues. We come full circle, Rosie, where we talk about issues such as the carbon tax or immigration or deficit spending. These are issues that have the potential to cross party lines. So you may not be a diehard committed Conservative, but you're someone who may be persuaded around concerns on that front who voted for the Liberals in the last election. That's what the Liberals have to be worried about in this coming year, and that is what the Conservatives have to figure out how to communicate better around. That, you know what, this isn't just about the yellow vest, this isn't just about hell no carbon tax because we said so, but it's about making the really persuasive arguments as to why they are now looking like a better bet or a better party or a better government for that soft, persuadable, movable bank of voters. There's not a lot of them, but this is really what we're talking about competing for between those 2 parties.
Andre, last word to you then on what you think that should tell us about where people are going to put their attention and their time and their issues.
Well, Sachi just brought up the issue of the yellow vests, and that actually kind of is indicative of, you know, where the Conservative fortunes lie. Is it, do Canadians believe in a type of a nationalist ethos where we believe that the people who are here have to come here by a certain means, or do we make room for new immigrants? Do we make room for refugees, et cetera? The last election was fought very much on that issue, and Canadians responded, and we said that we are a country that's open to refugees. So if the Conservatives are going to place their fortunes on the intolerance of Canadians abroad, I don't really see good fortunes for them in this election.
Okay. I love that we're already talking about the election in January.
Used to it.
This is going to be my joy for the next year. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. If you want to listen to more of all of these guys talking about other issues, make sure you check out our At Issue podcast. You can find it on our website, cbc.ca/thenational, or any